You are standing in your bathroom late at night. The house is completely quiet, the lights are dimmed to a soft glow, and you are staring into the shelves of your open medicine cabinet. Your knee is throbbing with a dull ache from the afternoon walk, or perhaps your mind is racing with the quiet anxieties of the evening, and you know that sleep is going to be a struggle. You reach out for a familiar plastic bottle. You pop a couple of pills into your palm, swallow them down with a small glass of tap water, and head down the hallway to your bed. You do not think twice about it. You bought that bottle right off the shelf at the local pharmacy, perhaps just an aisle over from the chewing gum and the greeting cards. You figure that if it is that easy to buy, if no one asked you for a slip of paper from a doctor, it must be completely harmless. You figure it is just a simple, reliable tool to fix a simple, everyday problem. I know that exact routine, and I know that exact assumption because I lived it for years. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 81 years old. I live out here in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the intense heat dictates the slow rhythm of the day. But I grew up back in Columbus, Ohio. My father spent his entire life working in a manufacturing plant back in the Midwest. He was a man of quiet discipline who understood how heavy machinery worked inside and out. He knew that when an industrial engine gets older, you do not treat it the same way you treat a brand new one straight off the factory floor. You change the oil differently. You listen carefully to the hum of the belts. You respect the high mileage. But for some reason, when it comes to our own human bodies, we forget the mileage completely. We expect a physical body that has been running continuously for 7 or 8 decades to process chemicals exactly the way it did when we were 40 years old. I spent the majority of my working life in community health education. My job was not to wear a white coat or prescribe medicine. My job was to sit in union halls, church basements, and community centers and translate complicated medical manuals into plain English for hardworking people. I had to explain how the human body actually functions when the tools start to wear down. And what I learned over those decades of observation and what I have seen happen to my close friends and to my own body is that the human machinery processes medications in a fundamentally different way after the age of 70. Your internal filtration system slows down significantly. Your kidneys, which act as the primary filters, pull drugs out of your bloodstream at a much slower pace than they used to. Your liver metabolizes compounds at a mere fraction of the rate it managed 20 years ago. And your brain becomes incredibly sensitive to any substance meant to sedate you or calm you down. A specific dose of a pill that was perfectly safe for you at 55 can now easily cause falls, memory impairment, and severe kidney damage. I want to talk to you about 5 specific things you very likely have sitting in your medicine cabinet right now. 3 of these require absolutely no prescription, which is exactly the detail that makes them so dangerous. Because they are so easy to get, we stop respecting them as actual potent drugs. We treat them like candy. I learned the hard way that this casual assumption can mean the difference between keeping your independence in your own home and ending up permanently in a hospital bed. Let us start with the little blue pills, the ones millions of us reach for when the house is quiet and we cannot sleep. You know them as Benadryl for allergies, or as the active sleep ingredient in over-the-counter bottles like Tylenol PM and Ziz-Quil. The chemical name printed on the back of the label is diphenhydramine. A few years ago, after my wife Margaret passed away, the house felt entirely too empty. I was having trouble stringing together more than 3 or 4 hours of sleep at a time in the Arizona heat. I started taking 2 of those little blue pills every single night before bed. I figured they were sold right over the counter at the grocery store, so they had to be perfectly safe for a man my age. Then I started noticing the fog creeping in. I would walk into the kitchen to get a glass of water and completely forget why I was standing there holding the refrigerator door open. I would be talking to my neighbor across the fence and suddenly lose the word I was trying to say right in the middle of a sentence. I was terrified. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought it was the beginning of the end. My daughter Laura is a registered nurse up in Phoenix. She came down for a Sunday visit, noticed the empty boxes on my nightstand, and sat me down at the kitchen table. She explained to me that diphenhydramine is one of the most potent anticholinergic drugs available without a prescription. Anticholinergic is a long, complicated word, but it simply means it blocks a chemical called acetylcholine, which is the exact transmitter your brain uses for memory and learning. Laura told me that if you block that critical chemical night after night, the consequences are severe. She mentioned a massive study that followed older adults for over 7 years, which proved that people who regularly use these types of antihistamines have a 54% increased risk of developing dementia. I was actively poisoning my own memory just to get a few hours of artificial sleep. I stopped taking them that very day. It took a few weeks of terrible, restless nights, but eventually the heavy fog lifted. My brain cleared up. I got my mind back simply by throwing away a bottle that cost me $6. That frightening experience made me look at every other bottle in my house with a new level of suspicion. It made me look at the little brown pills I was taking whenever my knees flared up from a long walk. I am talking about ibuprofen and naproxen, the medications we all buy under the names Advil, Motrin, and Aleve. If you are over 60, you almost certainly have a bottle of this in your kitchen drawer, your car console, or your bathroom cabinet. Back in Ohio, I knew manufacturing guys who ate these like breath mints every time their backs or shoulders flared up from the assembly line. For a younger person using them occasionally, they do the job. But after 70, the risk profile changes entirely. My son, Daniel, is a physical therapist up in Denver. He spends his days working with older folks, trying to keep their joints moving smoothly. He is the one who explained the plumbing of the body to me. Your kidneys are the filters that clear these pain drugs from your bloodstream. By the time you hit 70, your baseline kidney function has naturally declined by 40 to 50% compared to when you were a young man. When you drop ibuprofen into a system that already has heavily reduced filtration, the chemical lingers. It stays in the pipes much longer, it hits the system much harder, and it progressively damages the very tissue that is trying to clear it out. It is silent damage. You do not feel your kidneys failing until it is too late. It is not just the kidneys either. The lining of your stomach becomes much more fragile as you age, and these anti-inflammatory drugs directly attack that protective barrier. Older adults who take these regularly are 3 to 5 times more likely to develop a serious gastrointestinal bleed. And if you have any history of high blood pressure or heart disease, these pills elevate your pressure and cause fluid retention, which dramatically increases the risk of heart failure. This is the trifecta that makes these pills so dangerous as a daily habit. Daniel told me that plain acetaminophen is a much safer tool for the job when it comes to older joints, as long as you keep it under the correct daily limit of 3,000 milligrams. It is significantly safer for the kidneys and the stomach. I swapped my bottles and my knees feel just as manageable, but I know my engine's filters are no longer taking a daily beating. Then there's the third thing we ignore, and this one is usually a formal prescription that someone started a decade ago and just never bothered to stop taking. I am talking about the stomach acid pills. The proton pump inhibitors, sold as omeprazole, Prilosec, or Nexium. I had a buddy in my community health program, an old union rep named Thomas, who absolutely swore by them. He started taking them for a stomach ulcer when he was 65. 9 years later, he was still taking them every single morning. He started complaining to me about a constant tingling and numbness in his feet and a feeling of heavy exhaustion that he just could not shake. Thomas thought it was just poor circulation from getting older, but these stomach drugs are only meant for short-term use, maybe 4 to 8 weeks, to let the stomach lining heal. When you take them for years, you are permanently shutting down the body's acid factory. And your body desperately needs that stomach acid to absorb vitamin B12 from your food. If you suppress the acid for a decade, your B12 levels drop sharply. That severe deficiency is exactly what causes that peripheral neuropathy, the frightening numbness in the hands and feet, and it can even cause a cognitive decline that looks exactly like dementia. Thomas also found out from his doctor that his magnesium levels were dangerously low which is another hidden risk of taking these pills forever. Low magnesium severely affects the electrical wiring of your heart and your nerve signaling. His geriatric doctor finally took him off the pills slowly, started giving him aggressive B12 replacement therapy, and managed his stomach issues by simply changing his diet. Within a few months, the feeling came back to his feet. He had been suffering for years because no one ever stopped to ask if a medication he started a decade ago still belonged in an older body. The fourth danger is something people rarely talk about openly, but it sits quietly in millions of medicine cabinets across the country. The heavy prescribed sleep medications, specifically Zolpidem, which most people know as Ambien. We are so desperate for a good night's rest that we will take anything that promises to turn off the lights in our brain. But this drug does not actually give you the restorative deep sleep your foundation needs. It suppresses the deep stages of sleep and just keeps you in a light, artificial slumber. You fall asleep fast, but you wake up exhausted and unrefreshed, which just makes you want to take a higher dose the next night. The real danger, though, is what happens the morning after. In an older body, the blood concentrations of this drug can be incredibly high the next day compared to a younger person. You wake up, you make your coffee, you feel completely normal. You do not feel drugged at all. But your reaction time and your physical coordination are severely compromised. You are essentially driving a car with the emergency brake still pulled. The research consistently shows that using this drug nearly doubles the risk of a hip fracture in older adults. A hip fracture is not a minor inconvenience when you are in your late 70s or 80s. It is a catastrophic event. Up to 3 out of 10 seniors who break a hip do not survive to the following year, usually because of blood clots or pneumonia that set in while they are stuck in a hospital bed trying to recover. The risk simply is not worth the artificial sleep. Laura told me that doctors now recommend something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is just a structured way to retrain your brain to sleep naturally. It outperforms the pills in the long run, and it leaves zero risk of you falling in your kitchen the next morning. The final category is perhaps the most difficult to discuss because these are drugs prescribed for very real, very frightening anxiety and panic. The benzodiazepines. You know them as Xanax, Valium, Ativan, or Klonopin. I have seen folks who have lost a spouse or gone through a terrible health scare rely on these just to get through the day. In the short term, they absolutely work. But the way an older brain processes these chemicals is entirely different than a younger one. Because your liver metabolizes the drug so slowly now, the chemical accumulates heavily in your system. A pill you took to calm your nerves at 10 o'clock at night is still heavily impairing your balance and coordination when you get out of bed at 3 in the morning to get a glass of water. These drugs are strongly associated with a substantially increased risk of serious, injurious falls that require hospitalization. Falls are the leading cause of fatal injury for people over 65 in the United States. It is not a small side effect. It is a fundamental threat to your ability to keep living in your own home. And beyond the falls, these drugs consistently impair your attention, memory, and executive function, even when you think you have completely adapted to the medication. Now, I want to be incredibly clear about this. If you're taking one of these anxiety medications right now, you absolutely cannot just throw the bottle away tomorrow. Stopping them abruptly can cause severe withdrawal, including life-threatening seizures. This requires a slow, careful medical transition. You have to work with your doctor on a supervised gradual taper to safely reduce the dependency. All 5 of these medications appear on something called the Beers criteria. It is a medically reviewed, regularly updated list compiled by the American Geriatric Society that specifically outlines drugs that are potentially inappropriate for older adults. This is not some fringe internet theory. This is mainstream medical science finally reaching the people who need it most. The problem is that in a rushed 15-minute doctor's appointment, no one has the time to sit down and review your entire life's history. to see if an old prescription is now quietly harming you. You have to be the one to bring it up. Maybe you are wondering the same thing I wondered when I realized my sleep aid was stealing my memory. You wonder how you are supposed to fix it when you are not a doctor yourself. The answer is surprisingly simple, and it puts the control back in your hands. You need to take an inventory of your own toolbox. Tomorrow morning, I want you to gather up every single bottle in your house. The prescriptions in the cabinet, the pain relievers in the drawer, the sleep aids on the nightstand, all of it. Write every single one of them down on a piece of paper. Remember, just because you bought it without a prescription does not mean it is safe for an older body. Take that piece of paper to your next doctor's appointment. Look your doctor in the eye and specifically ask them for a geriatric medication review. Ask them to evaluate your list against the Beers criteria. When you use those exact words, any good doctor will immediately know that you are paying attention and that you are an active partner in your own health care. If you are taking ibuprofen every day, ask them if acetaminophen is a safer alternative for your specific kidneys. If you have been on a stomach acid pill for 3 years, ask them if it is time to check your B12 levels and see if you still need it. Do not assume that a medication is safe simply because you have been taking it for a long time. Your body has changed since you first started taking some of these drugs, and your medication list needs to catch up. The independence we all want to maintain as we get older, the ability to walk down our own driveways and recognize our own kitchens, is not protected by luck. It is protected in the small, quiet habits of our daily lives. It is protected by paying attention to the foundation. It is protected by understanding that our machinery needs a different kind of respect than it did 40 years ago. The body does not ask for things twice in the same way. What you ignore today can very easily limit you tomorrow. But the wonderful truth, the thing that gives me hope every single day when I walk out my front door into the warm Arizona sun, is that the human body is incredibly resilient. When you stop burdening your liver, when you protect your kidneys, when you let your brain's natural chemistry function without interference, the fog lifts, the energy returns, the machine runs smoother. You have the power to ask these questions. You have the right to demand a medical routine that fits the body you have today, not the body you had 20 years ago. I learned this late, perhaps later than I should have, but I am still here, and I am still taking notes. And so are you. Take care of yourselves. Protect your machinery. Keep asking the hard questions, and I will talk to you again soon.